She put a bullet in her chest and then wrapped her up and then took her to her own backyard and buried her in the ground.
And truly lived on her own terms. Amy was not only a mother, but a daughter and a sister.
And they moved and I moved and it was over.
What did you do? What's the first thing you remember? You remember pulling the trigger?
No, I remember the noise of the gun.
Shot the gun one time, but it fired 5 or 6 times. She told me that
some crimes are committed in anger. Others are planned with chilling precision. Debra Patton is accused of burying her own sister in the backyard they once shared, while Alyssa Bradburn stayed calm after fatally shooting her own father. What they left behind wasn't just a crime scene. It was a lifetime of grief, unanswered questions, and prison sentences they may never escape. Let's begin.
I want to thank you. I do stand here blameless for this. I do intend to appeal the verdict. I do also forgive everything that I just heard in here that was a lie.
A calm Florida neighborhood became the center of a disturbing mystery. A woman vanished without a trace, and years later, investigators uncovered a devastating discovery in her own backyard. In May 2021, 61-year-old Karen Pace suddenly disappeared from her Hillsborough County home. Her friends became worried when they stopped hearing from her. When they finally received messages, they said they didn't sound like Karen at all. Concerned friends visited her home several times, where her car was still parked outside. But Karen was nowhere to be found, and many of her belongings remained untouched. They repeatedly asked her sister, 72-year-old Debra Patton, where Karen was, but Patton brushed off their concerns and denied knowing anything. As the missing person investigation continued, detectives learned that the sisters' relationship had become strained in the years before Karen disappeared. Friends described growing tension between them. Investigators also reviewed surveillance footage from a neighbor's security camera, which showed Karen entering her home but never leaving. Later that night, the footage appeared to show Debra taking a large garbage bag to the trash. When deputies searched the property, they found Karen's body buried in the backyard. Prosecutors told the jury that Karen had been fatally shot before her body was wrapped in towels, plastic bags, duct tape, and bungee cords, then buried behind the home. According to the prosecutor,
Marco jumps the fence of the house, goes into the house from the backyard somehow. That is where they encounter Debra Patton.
one of Karen's friends also testified in court that, according to Karen,
for months before her death, Karen repeatedly stated, if something happens to me, tell them it was my sister. She is going to kill me.
the case was delayed for more than 4 years after Patton was ruled mentally unfit to stand trial and later received treatment before the trial finally began. Prosecutors argued that the sisters' relationship had fallen apart and that the evidence pointed to Debra's responsibility. The defense disagreed, saying there was no direct evidence linking her to Karen's death and arguing that investigators failed to pursue other leads, including Karen's phone records. After hearing testimony from investigators, friends, and other witnesses, the jury found Debra Patton guilty.
I think you may think it's a joke. Well, enjoy yourself for the rest of your life, because I'm going to mandate you to go to prison for the rest of your life. 25 years out.
In July 2026, a judge handed down his decision and said, "Enjoy yourself for the rest of your life, because I'm going to mandate you go to prison for the rest of your life." She was sentenced for second-degree murder with a firearm and mistreatment of a dead human body. Despite the verdict, Patton smirked instead of showing any remorse for her actions. Karen's friends described her death as a devastating loss that shattered their sense of trust and safety. One friend told the court,
"I want her to die in prison. I want her to be miserable. She's made the rest of us miserable."
While Patton continued to deny responsibility, Karen's loved ones said they were grateful that justice had finally been served after years of waiting. One sister buried a devastating secret in her own backyard. But our next case began with something even more deceptive, a desperate call that wasn't what it seemed.
Jury find the defendant, Sarah Hartsfield, guilty of the offense of murder as alleged in the indictment.
A husband was rushed to the hospital after suddenly becoming unresponsive. But as detectives pieced together the evidence, they uncovered a dark secret that stretched back years. On January 7th, 2023, 50-year-old Sarah Hartsfield called her husband, Joseph Hartsfield, who had become unresponsive because of his diabetes. At first, it appeared to be a tragic medical emergency, but doctors soon determined that Joseph had received a fatal dose of insulin. As investigators looked deeper into the couple's relationship, they learned the marriage had been struggling. Joseph had even told his sister that he feared Sarah might one day take his life while he slept. Detectives carefully examined Sarah's phone records and quickly noticed several inconsistencies. Although Sarah claimed she had been asleep before calling the emergency phone, data showed she had been using her phone almost every hour during the night. Investigators also discovered that messages and a video showing Joseph struggling to breathe had been deleted before officers could review them. As the investigation continued, detectives uncovered another disturbing detail. Years earlier, in 2018, Sarah had been involved in the death of her former fiancé, a case that had been ruled self-defense at the time. During the trial, prosecutors argued that the evidence pointed to one conclusion: Joseph's death was not an accident. They told the jury that Sarah's actions, including deleting evidence and changing statements, painted a clear picture of what happened inside the home. Her defense team argued that Joseph, who had diabetes, may have accidentally caused his own death because of medications that made him more sensitive to insulin. The jury listened to both sides before reaching its decision. Prosecutors said Sarah had a pattern of deception in her relationships. They argued that Joseph had trusted her, but that he instead became another victim. They also pointed to the earlier death of her former fiancé, saying the similarities raised serious concerns about her past. The exact motive was never fully established, but prosecutors believe the evidence showed Joseph's death was intentional. After hearing days of testimony, the jury found Sarah Hartsfield guilty of killing her husband. She was sentenced to life in prison, although she chose to remain silent while the verdict was read. Following her conviction, authorities also reopened the investigation into the 2018 death of her former fiancé to determine whether new evidence could change the outcome of that case. What first appeared to be a medical emergency ended with a life sentence and fresh questions about a death from years earlier. For Joseph's loved ones, the verdict brought a measure of justice, but it could never replace the husband, brother, and family member they lost. What looked like a medical emergency ended with a murder investigation. The next case begins with smoke rising from an apartment, but the real horror wasn't the fire. It was what firefighters found inside.
Did you kill Brian Goodwin?
No.
Did you kill Amy Smith?
No, I did not.
Did you rob Brian Goodwin?
I did not rob.
What first looked like a routine apartment fire soon became the center of a chilling double homicide investigation. 2 people were found dead inside a Davenport apartment, and detectives soon uncovered evidence that pointed to something far more disturbing than an accidental fire. In the early hours of January 16, 2024, firefighters rushed to an apartment on North Division Street after reports of a structure fire. Once the flames were brought under control, they made a heartbreaking discovery. Inside were 44-year-old Brian Goodwin and Amy Smith. Both had lost their lives before the fire began. Investigators later determined that the victims had been fatally shot, and authorities believed the fire had been deliberately set in an attempt to hide the crime. As detectives pieced together the evidence, the investigation quickly focused on 2 people who had been living with the victims, Adriana Blake and Devin Brait. According to prosecutors, the pair left the apartment after the incident and later checked into a hotel in Galesburg. During the investigation, detectives recovered cell phones containing photos of the 2 posing with firearms and protective gear. Investigators also testified that one video appeared to show Blake saying, "I shot both of them." Police allege the suspects also used a combustible material inside the apartment in an attempt to destroy evidence before leaving the scene. After weeks of testimony, a Scott County jury found Adriana Blake guilty of multiple charges, including 2 counts of first-degree murder, first-degree robbery, first-degree arson, and mistreatment of a corpse. Before receiving her sentence, Blake addressed the courtroom. She told the judge that her confession had been forced, claimed the evidence did not match the accusations, and insisted she was innocent. But the judge strongly rejected those claims. Prosecutors argued that after Brian Goodwin and Amy Smith were fatally shot, the apartment was intentionally set on fire to cover up the crime and destroy evidence. Authorities said both victims had been living with Blake and Brait in the months leading up to the killings. Braith was later convicted on similar charges and also faces life in prison.
The jury find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree.
He told Blake that she was not the victim and said, "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree." The court sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In addition to 2 life sentences without parole, Blake was ordered to pay $150,000 in restitution to each victim's family. Although she remained emotionless while the verdict was read. Throughout the hearing, she maintained her innocence, but the jury's verdict remained unchanged. The most emotional moments came from Amy Smith's family. Her mother, sisters, and daughter described the pain of losing someone they loved and the lasting impact it's had on their lives. Her sister said,
My sister was murdered. There, I said it. You cannot imagine how hard it is to truly accept this reality.
Amy's mother shared that her granddaughter struggled to leave the house after the tragedy, while her sisters spoke about the grief they continued to carry every day. 2 lives were taken, and 2 families were left forever changed. What prosecutors described as an attempt to hide the truth only led investigators to uncover an even more devastating crime. An apartment fire was meant to erase the evidence, but it only exposed the truth. Our next case shows how years of resentment ended in one of America's most infamous double killings.
Eddie Broderick is sentenced to consecutive sentences amounting to 32 years to life in prison.
What began as a painful divorce soon became one of America's most talked about crime cases. A former husband and his new wife were found fatally shot inside their home, and the woman responsible would spend the rest of her life behind bars. Betty and Dan Broderick married in 1969 and raised 4 children together, but over the years, their marriage fell apart. During the 1980s, Dan began a relationship with Linda Kulkina, a former flight attendant who later worked as his legal assistant. As tensions grew, Dan filed for divorce in 1985. The separation became a long and bitter legal battle over custody of their children in the family home. Dan was eventually awarded custody, while Betty was granted visitation rights. On the morning of November 5, 1989, police were called to Dan Broderick's home in Hillcrest. Inside, they found Dan and his wife, Linda, with fatal gunshot injuries. Investigators learned that Betty had entered the home using a key she had taken from one of her daughters weeks earlier. Authorities said she quietly went upstairs to the bedroom and opened fire with a .38 caliber revolver. Both Dan and Linda were struck multiple times and did not survive. During her trial, Betty admitted she had gone to the house, but said overwhelming emotions had taken over. She told the court that a letter from Dan's attorney, warning her she could face legal consequences for continuing to contact and threaten the couple, had sparked her anger like a fuse. She also said,
There are no words to describe what you feel when you find out your husband's having an affair.
After hearing weeks of testimony, a jury found Betty Broderick guilty of 2 counts of second-degree murder in 1991. Prosecutors argued that years of bitterness over the divorce, custody disputes, and Dan's new marriage had built up until Betty acted on her anger. The warning letter she received shortly before the shooting was believed to have pushed an already tense situation to its breaking point. Betty Broderick was sentenced to 32 years to life in prison.
And solely upon the laws of the state of California. So for count 1, she's sentenced to the Department of Corrections for a term of 17 years to life.
Although she shows no sign of guilt for her actions. In 1992, she was transferred to the California Institution for Women, where she remained for the rest of her life. In 2025, Betty Broderick died at the age of 78, while still serving her sentence. The Broderick case captured national attention for decades, inspiring books, documentaries, and television dramas. But behind the headlines was a family forever changed. 4 children lost both of their parents in different ways, one to a rampage and the other to prison. A bitter divorce that lasted for years ended in a tragedy that affected countless lives and remains one of America's most unforgettable true crime cases. A bitter divorce destroyed one family, but our final case is even more chilling because the victim never expected the danger waiting inside his own home.
She shot him twice in the chest, once in the arm, and once in the forehead, just to make absolutely sure he was dead.
A daughter waited quietly inside her family home. Minutes later, her father walked through the front door after returning from a trip. Within seconds, 4 gunshots changed everything. What first appeared to be a tragic family incident soon revealed weeks of planning. On June 25, 2024, 68-year-old Timothy Bradburn returned home to Spokane, Washington after a trip to Hawaii. He was still carrying his luggage when his daughter, 31-year-old Alyssa Bradburn, opened fire. Authorities said Timothy was struck 4 times near the entrance of the home and died at the scene. Moments later, Alyssa calmly admitted she had shot her father. She told the dispatcher where his body was and said she'd be waiting outside for officers to arrive. When police reached the home, Alyssa peacefully surrendered and directed officers to the firearm. She also handed them her phone, journal, and personal writings. According to investigators, the journal contained a detailed confession and described plans she had made before the shooting. Prosecutors revealed that Alyssa had practiced at a local shooting range in the weeks leading up to the incident. They also said she moved the family dogs into a separate room before the shooting so they would not be harmed. At first, Alyssa claimed she had acted in self-defense and accused her father of years of mistreatment. However, investigators said they found no evidence to support those allegations. During the trial, Alyssa later withdrew those claims and admitted she was guilty. As the trial continued, in 2026, witnesses described what prosecutors called a carefully planned crime. They presented journal entries, practice sessions at a shooting range, and Alyssa's own statements to investigators as evidence of premeditation. After hearing all the testimony, the jury found Alyssa Bradburn guilty of first-degree murder. Following the verdict, she addressed the court and said, "I killed Tim Bradburn, and I am guilty." Prosecutors argued that the killing was not an impulsive act, but a deliberate plan that had been prepared for weeks. The defense said Alyssa struggled with mental illness and that she sometimes had difficulty separating reality from fantasy. Despite those arguments, the jury concluded the evidence showed the crime had been planned. On April 2nd, 2026, Alyssa Bradburn was sentenced to 28 years in prison for the killing of her father. During the sentencing hearing, she smiles as the judge announces the sentence. For Timothy Bradburn's family, the loss was heart-wrenching. Alyssa's brother, Trace, described their father as a loving and supportive man who always stood by his children. He said,
"When my father was everything to me and my family. He was a shield that protected our family. He sacrificed, worked tirelessly, did everything so we could succeed."
He told the court that his father would do anything for his family and rejected the mistreatment allegations made against him. These women turned the people closest to them into victims, leaving behind shattered families and lives that could never be repaired. In the end, every verdict carried the same message. Some choices can never be undone, and some sentences last a lifetime.